All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Raj Borsellino. I'm a program officer at Robinhood. As you might know, Robinhood has a fantastic young professionals network called The Forest. The Forest membership includes hundreds and hundreds of next generation poverty fighters. And a few months ago, we launched something called the Forest Book Club. It's a series of events that explores themes of social and economic justice, and it's facilitated by an amazing collection of best-selling authors and Robinhood leaders. Tonight, we are excited to open this special Forest Book Club event to the larger Robinhood network, and as it's going to be as part of our Plugged In event series. So to our amazing Forest members, welcome back, and thank you so much for your support. And to those folks who are new to the Forest, welcome. We hope you'll join. We hope you'll keep coming back. You can always feel free to learn more or to sign up at theforest.org. So tonight's discussion is about the restaurant industry in New York City and how it's been impacted by the pandemic. And to guide that discussion, we're going to use the amazing new recipe book, Serving New York, as our jumping off point. We'll also be joined by an incredible set of panelists, and they include Kristin Studeman, who's curated Serving New York. They include Camilla Marcus, who's the chef and owner of Westbourne and the co-founder of Relief Opportunities for All Restaurants, or ROAR. Annie Shi, who's the general manager and co-owner of King Restaurant. And this discussion is going to be facilitated by Howie Kahn, who's a journalist and host of the Takeaway Only podcast. And I also do want to give a huge shout out to the dozen or so Robinhood staff members who have really been working so hard to make this fantastic event happen. Before we dive in, we do just want to remind everyone how critically important these issues are. Since the March of this year, New York has seen more than 26,000 restaurants shutter their stores, and many of them have had to close permanently. Right now, about a quarter of all people facing unemployment in New York come from the hospitality industry. And for many of them, there's no end in sight. So that's why we partnered with Camilla through Relief Opportunities for All Restaurants on a cash assistance fund. And thanks to the generosity of so many people, including many in this room here, that fund has already raised more than $1 million to provide a critical lifeline to more than 1,600 struggling bar and restaurant workers across all 5 boroughs. And we actually expect to support another 800 people just this month. And finally, just a quick housekeeping item. In this Zoom webinar format, all participants are going to remain muted. We've collected audience questions in advance of this conversation, but we also have the Q&A function, so feel free to use that to ask questions directly. So thank you all again for joining us. And now I will hand it off to our moderator, Howie Kahn, to get the conversation started.
Raj, thanks so much for the warm Robinhood welcome. I'm really excited to be here. I think it's going to be a great panel. I want to jump right in. Kristin, I want to start with you. We're here for this amazing book you've put together. You brought a community together to create something important and meaningful. And right here, it belongs in my kitchen now. Thank you for making Serving New York. Tell me about why. I mean, you could have, wrote out the pandemic in a million different ways. People all chose their own pandemic strategy. You jumped in with a big project and made this book. Give me some background about why the restaurant industry matters to you and why you felt like you had to help.
Well, I think I would have been bored making so much sourdough, No, from the minute that we went into lockdown, it became really apparent to me really quickly that our friends in the restaurant business were going to need our help. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a avid diner. I'm a chef and a friend of the restaurant industry. And, for one second I thought, okay, what could I possibly do that's going to make an impact? But then I immediately thought that the risk of not doing anything was so much greater. And, very quickly it came to me that I could perhaps put together a collection of recipes and maybe sell it and get someone to buy it and raise some money for a cause. So I saw Cammy really moving quickly to sort of unify and raise funds and awareness about the cause. And I said to Cammy, hey, is someone else already doing this? Or, because I figured at that point someone already was, even though it was quite early. And she said, no, go for it. I asked her about doing this and then realized I had no idea how to do a cookbook. But once again decided that it wasn't the time to really question that element. It was more, we had to do something. And so I put out a call through the ROAR network that was quickly growing, asking for a recipe, with the only premise being that it would be something that is pantry friendly. because not only did I want to help restaurants, but also help people at home trying to feed themselves and cook for their families in the midst of a crisis. And, you know, restaurants responded really quickly. And then, you know, one by one, people kind of just jumped on board to help me out with this project. So, you know, my collaborator, Brian Fountain, who's the man responsible for making it look this beautiful, I have to give him a huge shout out. But then also just dozens, maybe hundreds of people who pitched in pro bono to make this book come together. And so then we released a digital version of the book in May. And then we have just released the print version, which we are celebrating here tonight. And I'm proud to say that we have raised nearly $100,000 for the fund, and 100% of the profits from the print version go to the Roar Fund.
I mean, you've moved mountains really to make this happen. And I just can't stress enough how much of a challenge it is to put something like this together at all. A process like this sometimes takes 2 years, and you put it together in a couple months, got it to market, got attention, raised all this money, helped a lot of people. I think that's one thing that's been really amazing about the last 7,000 months that have made up this year. How many months is it really at this point? Anyways, you know, people have had different approaches in terms of what they've done to keep certain things afloat, take care of people. Camilla, you're one of the founding members of Roar. I remember talking to you about Roar when it was just baby Roar back in March.
I think it was week 1.
Yeah, I think it was. Tell me about, you know, the early conversations that helped launch that and the reason you felt you had to take action in that way in terms of lobbying and creating policy and creating a fund to take care of people.
Yeah, I mean, I look back and it all just happened pretty fast, to be honest. And frankly, I was nodding along as Kristin was sharing sort of her perspective. I mean, I've never spoken to a lawmaker before in my life. I vote, I care about issues, but I would not call myself political. And what happened was really even before the shutdown, you know, the governor and the mayor were saying, eat out, eat out, eat out that Saturday. And then Sunday was a full shutdown. And it was sort of like, frankly, being smacked in the face. I mean, and our industry was, you know, we knew it was coming, but I think the sort of lights on, lights off, mixed messaging and really sort of, I think, mishandled process to get us to what we knew was sort of inevitable became pretty stark. So I started calling some friends that Monday morning in the industry. I've worked in restaurants for 10 years for a lot of different people. And, you know, being also bi-coastal, and I have friends in Seattle and Milan that were hit really hard. So I also felt like I kind of had a little bit more of a broader perspective. And I called around some friends and every person said, I laid off my entire team. And I started doing the numbers in my head and thinking, shit, I mean, this is the difference between a recession and a depression. And we are sitting on a sleeping giant of an issue that no one seems to see or understand. In fact, that Monday, the unemployment website in New York crashed.
Right.
And I just started calling people, and, you know, I have a couple contacts to the city, and I said, you know, are you guys doing something? Do you understand that 1 million people, we employ almost 1 million people in New York State, are now unemployed pretty much overnight? I don't know who's hiring them. We can't work from home. It's actually illegal to work from home. You know, what is happening? And every person said, oh, no, that's not, you know, we're not focused on that. We're not focused on that. And it really started to make me afraid. And again, like I said, really afraid of the difference between a recession and a depression. Recessions are hard, especially in major urban areas. And to think about New York and a depression, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just the anxiety of it all. You know, if fight or flight's the choice, I'm definitely a fighter. And I just started calling a bunch of friends in the industry and saying, we can't go down without a fight. And we're very clearly not on the agenda. You know, I spoke to the New York partnership and we were not even on the agenda. And I actually I called Wes that Monday as well. And I said, what is happening? And he said, I am equally as terrified, and your industry going down only makes our job that much harder. We're already concerned about poverty in New York. And I said, well, we have to do this together. We have to do something. So we got on the phone that Wednesday with 30 restaurateurs around New York, and in 45 minutes came up with, you know, a plan and needs from the state and the city. We put it up on change.org. We had a couple 100,000 signatures within a week. And everyone realizing didn't matter if you were one location, a major restaurant group, whether you were in the city or you were upstate. I mean, everyone was dealing with the exact same thing. And, they always say a bunch of chefs in the room don't tend to agree. I've never seen people agree faster, probably in my entire career in the business. So I called Robin Hood, and, Wes and thankfully Jamie and Victoria and the team jumped on right away. And I said, what I'm most concerned about right now is people are stuck at home. Access to food, access to capital, access to ways to support yourself is completely non-existent overnight. And these are people who are home, who tend to live more paycheck to paycheck. They don't have mass savings. I don't know what they're going to do. And I don't know that we can rely on social services, given that unemployment benefits just crashed. What do? We need to get cash in their hands, and we need to do it now. And it was when, all restaurants were doing relief funds for their employees, but realizing that this was not going to be a 2-week problem, not even close, I knew we needed real capital, and there's no one better at this, with the most professionalism and the most targeted aid than Robin Hood. So we went to work, and it was actually a lot harder than you'd think. It was 24 hours a day for 2 weeks straight. Getting a cash assistance program is actually incredibly difficult from a compliance standpoint, particularly. Interestingly, what most people don't realize is emergency aid is under greater scrutiny. So it's actually incredibly difficult to put together. And we could not have done it without Robin Hood.
What kind of application process is there to get one of those $500 relief checks? And how many people do you see applying still at this point going into, November?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I will also say we put up a website in a day. I called a friend and said, hey, you're going to do this for free, and we need all these features. And I'm so sorry, but you have 12 hours because we need to start fundraising tomorrow on a Sunday, no less. So the application process, and we said from the start, it has to be really simple. So, I mean, it's just a handful of questions. It's very straightforward. It's meant to be very easy. And, as you heard, I mean, we've actually raised over 1.5 million. It'll probably be approaching 2 million shortly. And every 2 weeks that's handed out. So it's not like we're holding capital. I mean, as the money's coming in, we are dishing out checks. And unfortunately, it's going to continue to be, unfortunately, we're going to have to keep it open until we get, meaningful remedies from our government and until we're on the other side of this pandemic. But it's been thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've applied and have been paid out. And what we've seen in the results, interestingly, so the fear with cash assistance from a government and compliance standpoint is, oh, someone's going to use it and go buy whatever shoes. And what we've seen very starkly is that it's rent and food, and someone who's stuck home, this is a crisis unlike any other. How do you have your income completely taken, but you're stuck at home? You probably can't move, you don't have a huge amount of adjustment on your expenses. Cash is really what you need. And most organizations that are relief organizations, especially in a place like New York, are programmatic, and they're providing relief services, not actually giving cash in your hands. So we're actually proving that it does work and it has been effective. And our hypothesis of this is what our people need now, again, unfortunately proved to be true all the way through.
I mean, I see the need for this kind of assistance continuing and maybe even increasing. I know people who have held restaurant jobs for the last 20 years who are now working 4, 5, 6 jobs that are cobbled together. I know people who have moved out of the city. I know people who are homeless. I know people who are institutionalized, dealing with mental health issues. So it's severe. And I think, spreading the word that funds like this exist and there are paths to help. It's just really important.
And as I like to remind our government, I always ask the mayor and the governor's office, when was the last time you hired someone who didn't go to college? Your interns go to college. Yeah. Think about how many people work in restaurants. It's a second chance. It's a first chance. It's someone who's really relying on that to build themselves up in the most expensive city, arguably in the country. Losing your job in that way, and you're not exactly first in line to be rehired by any other industry, certainly not in a pandemic and a recession. Something's got to give. And you're going to pay for it either way, whether it's through social services and public services or through the kindness of others, which thankfully we've been able to do through Robin Hood.
Annie, I want to talk about King. You and Jess and Claire run the most special, beautiful, restaurant that, it's a great place to go on a date. It's the kind of place we're all pulling for. What has it been like for you guys, treading water, struggling to survive? I know you guys, very carefully planned your reopening, and it took many months, and you're thriving now a little bit in this warmer weather, but with winter coming back, what are the thoughts? How are you guys strategizing to keep afloat?
I mean, I think we're taking it a day at a time, which is, I think, what most restaurant owners are thinking at this point. But we, like everyone else in New York, served our last lunch service Monday, March 17th, and then furloughed our entire team, which was around 36 people. And that's not all full-time. It's, a mix of full-time and part-time, but that's how many staff that we employ as like a very small restaurant in New York City, just to give you guys an idea of, how many people are involved in a restaurant's operations. And we were able to provide severance pay for our staff, and a very generous GoFundMe, but it's kind of, it's gone on longer than any of us could have expected. I think when we were shutting our doors and locking up, we thought we would be gone for 2 to 3 months and then back, by August latest. And it's just, it has not been the case. We were shut throughout until June, and our decision to do so was largely because none of our staff could get to the restaurant except by public transportation. And at that point, no one was, not that they weren't willing to get on public transportation, just didn't feel like it was the right call in terms of personal safety versus like being able to offer takeout, which we've never done before and didn't think we could do well. So we only opened in June for like to-go drinks and snacks back when that was really the only option. And then we opened for full service in July. And it's just been like a whirlwind. Like every time something happens, it's like you're opening a new restaurant and you have to like recreate yourself, and everyone keeps using the word pivot, but it has been so true in the restaurant industry. We were a full service sit down restaurant, no takeout, no delivery. Then we were running like a drink stand with like to-go food. Then we're like an outdoor restaurant. We have to like build out a deck, and now we have to like put out heaters and redo the inside. So like at every turn, there's all of these challenges and obstacles. And I think it's been incredible to see the creativity of people around the city and how they've been able to put together these gorgeous outdoor setups and the merchandise and turning into a market and doing these incredible like home delivery meal kits. So I think that has been the silver lining through all of this. As for the winter, we don't really know. We're currently open only for outdoor dining. We have ordered our heaters, but we are still waiting for the city to tell us what heaters we can and can't use, even though it's been a week or so since they were supposed to let us know. And already, if you're trying to buy like an outdoor heater at any local Home Depot, Lowe's, hardware shop, they're completely sold out. And then I guess we're just gonna see when we feel comfortable with indoor dining. We're getting it ready. So we've purchased our very expensive UV ray filters and air purifiers. And we're kind of getting that ready to go. But with everything else going on and like the localized surges in certain neighborhoods, we just feel like the timing for indoor dining doesn't quite make sense for us yet. And the weather's been so beautiful. Why not just keep going with outdoors for the time being? So that's kind of the long version of that.
Camilla, you recently closed your restaurant, Westbourne, which we were all sorry to hear. I miss the egg sandwiches. I've missed them for months. How hard was that decision for you? And what went through your mind when you finally decided like the right thing to do for now is to move on from this idea to, come up with a plan to do so? I mean, I know you're not done. I know this courses through your veins. So tell me about, hitting the pause button.
How does it feel? Brutal. I mean, I think what Annie shared first and foremost should not be underestimated. we were similarly 1,000 square feet, employed 30 people. I always like to tell people the jewelry store next door employed one person and we're the same exact floor plan. I mean, really restaurants are about employment and the people and the teams that we take care of. And it is horrible to have to choose. I mean, and to feel like you let down all of these people that, you know, you care about. They're your family as well, you know, and you spend a lot of time with them. You know, in March, when all of this happened, you know, I knew the shutdown was coming, and I'd say about 5 days before, I contacted my landlord and he said, great, hand over the keys, I'll get someone new in. And I said, are you joking me? You know, I've been here 2 years. I renovated the space. You didn't contribute. The floors were falling through, you know, and I've never missed a rent payment. Like, are you reading the news? I mean, literally 1,000 people a day were dying in New York. How is this your answer? So I sort of said, okay, you know, put my emotions aside, put my logical hat on. I thought, all right, let's see how he goes over the next couple of months when sort of reality sinks in. And again, same with the government. I mean, the first 3 months, everyone in government was saying, oh, it's fine, it's fine. It's sort of like, okay, by the time you realize that it's not fine, I don't know how much will be salvageable. You know, and then I kept getting email after email from our landlord, you know, why aren't you guys open? And we did the same as Annie. We talked to the mayor's office and I said, is anyone in your team taking the subway to work? I would venture no. And they said, well, we clean it in the mornings. I go, I don't think that the pandemic cares that you clean it in the mornings. You know, how do I look someone in the face and say, yes, take a subway to work when everyone else is at home, has left the city to go to their families, have, you know, moved across the country so they can be with loved ones. I mean, I myself have lost 7 friends to COVID and some are around my age. So,
Sorry.
you know, you also, I know, knew Floyd Cardoz, who operated a restaurant down the block. I've known Floyd for years. You know, when you've lost people and you're seeing mobile morgues everywhere you go, how do you look an employee in the face and say, yep, take the subway, it's no big deal, it's a regular day at work, so you can pack takeout boxes? I mean, it's a joke. So, you know, my landlord didn't leave his house for 5 months and he's calling me every day saying, why aren't you open? Why aren't you open? And I said, I'm sorry, you haven't even left your home, not even to go to the grocery store. This is absurd. And so the decision, I mean, I'm always an optimist, and I really had just hoped that as sort of summer went on and the months ticked, you know, he would become reasonable and understand that this is a 12 to 18 month, if not longer. I always say process because recovery, just, we're not even close to being on the other side where you can even use the word recovery. You know, it's trench warfare. I mean, we're still in it. And, you know, to realize that 5-6 months later, he had no intention of, you know, seeing reality. And, you know, a lot of us have personal guarantees. You know, I wrote a CNN piece with a lot of detail on sort of the specifics. Most of us, it's unfortunately standard to have personal guarantees on retail leases, especially if you're a first time. By the way, I know a lot of big restaurateurs that you all know by name, and many have personal guarantees as well, despite how, you know, mogul they might seem. And they're being exploited. You know, this is not the purpose of what personal guarantees were meant to do. It wasn't meant to be a backstop for a pandemic that's out of all of our control. And right now, the only people suffering and bearing financial cost, I mean, all the stuff that Annie talked about, building outdoor, you know, platforms, heaters, ventilation, UV, extra PPE, you know, we are similar to airlines and hospitals and schools, but we have not received the same attention, the same aid, the same financial support, but we have nearly as many people. And, you know, the landlords are not being required to contribute. Lenders are not being required to renegotiate mortgages. In fact, I keep sharing to people, it shocks them, in New York and across the country, most mortgages go in default if you renegotiate your lease because it changes the valuation that it was underwritten at. If you're vacant, it's not a breach of your covenants. And you get a tax rebate from New York if your space is vacant. It takes a landlord 5 years to lose money on a retail space when it's vacant.
So next
when
time
you're in our position, you're bleeding cash starting March. So
Mm-hmm.
you tell me how negotiations are supposed to happen reasonably without government intervention. I mean, I don't need a degree in economics to understand that that's not a balanced, it's not a balanced equation.
And has
so
the government
it was brutal.
has the government stepped up in any way to show that they're at least interested in possibly helping?
I hope I don't get in trouble.
Well,
Look, In some ways, yes. Outdoor dining was moved to phase two. It was supposed to be past phase three, and they did it
Mhm.
in a week. Does it mean that it was problematic? Yes. The regulations and the rules changed every day for 4 weeks because they did it so quickly. So it's sort of a, are they helping? Yes. Are they helping in the right way? Not wholly. Are they helping at the right time? No, they're a little late to the party. Does it come with a lot of cost, a lot of problems, and a lot of extra compliance that no one else is sharing the burden of? Yes. Are there bigger, larger restructuring plans that the state and the city should have done 4 months ago and have still not done 7 months into this crisis? 100%. Should the Restaurants Act have been passed when it was drafted in the summer? 100%. It passed in the House a week ago and the Senate's sitting on it right now. Are there things that could be done that have broad support across the country? 100,000%. What is wrong with our nation, with our state, and our city? That, again, you think about New York just exclusively, 1 million people. We employ more people than any other industry with the exception of healthcare. How is that not an agenda item? How is that not something that's even talked about with candidates? I mean, I hope the next mayoral race next year that restaurants are part of the agenda. It's major. And like I said, it's been a sleeping giant for too long. And I hope that it's awakened people to realize we can't continue to be ignored. And this has just pushed it over the edge, but they have failed us. They have failed this state, they've failed this city, and they have failed a million people in a big way.
Annie, for you guys, do you correspond with other restaurants to see what's going on and how people are getting through and what some of their approach is to all this? Or is this an isolating thing where everybody only has the time to stick to what's going on between their four walls and that just, eats up all the energy?
No, it's definitely more the former. We are in touch with so many people in the industry. I mean, Roar has been an amazing forum for all of us to get together and just share like what's on our minds, like really specific stuff that only other operators would care about, like whether you can put up umbrellas or tents for outdoor dining, and to have that resource when you're under so much stress and the burden decision making kind of is on your shoulders is really incredible. And I think I said this to you, Cami, but it's kind of amazing to see what restaurateurs can do when they're not constantly working on the floor of their restaurant.
Yeah.
And I think for the reason why we haven't been an agenda item for so long is because we are always working and we're always there in person, and we haven't had the time to sit down in front of our laptops and organize. And I think this pandemic kind of allowed all of us to do that for the first time. And it's created a really, hopefully, incredible foundation for future just organizing and activating kind of all of our experiences and the things that we need as an industry, because there's so much that needs to be done. But I think what's amazing about the restaurant industry is that everyone is always looking out for each other. Everyone's always open to sharing resources. People are incredibly generous and open. So I think we're really, really lucky. One anecdote is when we were trying to figure out outdoor dining, the email that the city sent out, I got it in my inbox Sunday night at like 1 a.m. So Monday morning technically, and it was for Wednesday. And I was like, okay, we need to like shut the next 2 days. We're not going to do outdoor drinks and I need to figure this out. I spent Monday and Tuesday just like walking around our neighborhood and chatting to my neighbors. And I found the guy who ended up building out our platform deck from Dante, and who then became the guy who built for Raku and 12 Chairs and Emmett's, which are all in McDougal across the street. And then the guys from Raku then came over, brought me a plastic cup of wine, and we were chatting, and that's how I found my umbrellas. Like it is all about collaboration, and that has been the silver lining to all of this, is just like feeling like you have that community. But yeah, it's who TBD what happens with the winter, but it's an amazing group of people.
Annie, can
And
you?
I just wanted to add one thing, because I don't know how many Robinhood, donors and community members know, but we actually have two arms to Roar. So one is the fund that we've set up with Robinhood, and one we actually structured predominantly as a lobbying group. So we engaged, well, we realized very quickly, first we focused on the employee relief fund, and then very quickly thereafter, we realized exactly what Annie had shared and what I shared a little bit, which was the government is not listening and they do not see what's happening. And so we've engaged a lobbyist on our behalf, and both are critically important because, again, the emergency relief funds is one thing, but we also have to work on more sustainable solutions so we can bring our teams back.
What are some of the policies that you would like to see go into effect and become the norm in the coming years as a result of all of this organization?
I mean, I think there's a number of things. One, the SLA rules are very archaic and incredibly constricting. And what we've seen in the pandemic, there's a lot more flexibility that's been enabled, but it's on 30-day executive orders. And we're seeing that it is helping, and all of the fears of, oh no, you can't change the rules, really have proven moot. So I think major SLA structural changes, because alcohol sales are a big part of restaurants and obviously help operating margins tremendously. Two is there's a lot of loopholes when it comes to compliance and litigation as it relates to labor, and it has led in a huge surge, at least in the last 10 years, of litigation that's really only benefiting lawyers. It's not going in the pockets of workers, and a lot of them are frivolous. A lot of them also are based on technical violations that should be curable. And I think, again, restructuring things so that it's more about conflict resolution, not litigation. Again, litigation to force settlement, which really only benefits lawyers, and really working towards, yes, we want to penalize bad behavior, but you also want to encourage people to be able to right the wrong and, not sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. And third is really, there needs to be real estate restructuring and tax restructuring. I mean, we as an industry pay almost 30% in corporate taxes. Most people would be aghast at that who run businesses. And again, when you think about, we're the largest private employer. So for example, you pay payroll taxes based on headcount, but we employ more people by multitudes than any other industry. So we're essentially being penalized for having more people. For restaurants, it should be based on sales. I mean, we have the lowest amount of sales per employee than any industry. That's not really a healthy ratio. You look at real estate, there should be much more tax incentives that de-incentivize and disincentivize vacancy, as I talked about a little bit earlier, and more incentivizes variable rents, not fixed rents for restaurants, as an incentive for employment, again, which is much better for the city and state. And we obviously represent a huge amount of the tax base, both our employees as well as us as employers in New York City and New York State. And so that fundamentally, the incentives for banks and landlords and the tax basis need to be rethought in a big way and redrawn, because that's what we're seeing right now is all of the incentives and being so landlord and mortgage or friendly, is coming to roost. And I think, your lender and your landlords are not contributing to employment in this city. And that's something that we really have to rethink.
Annie, I want to make sure that the voice of people who work in restaurants like yours is represented in this conversation. And I was wondering if you could share some of the conversations you've had with the people who work for you in terms of their concerns for their safety, their feelings about being back at work, interacting with multiple strangers a night, not knowing where they've been or where they've come from. What kind of energy exists at the restaurant amongst your staff right now? And if you could kind of, let me into the back room and tell me about some of those conversations where people express their concerns and anxieties and fears about working in a restaurant, I think that would be illuminating.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of our staff have families, so they're extremely concerned about their personal health and safety, but also about what they're bringing home to their kids, to their wives, husbands, partners, grandparents that live with them. And I think we have always been a really small team. We're obviously an even smaller team now. And I think the beauty of working alongside your staff means that you understand what they're going through. So my health and safety is the same as their health and safety. And so when we had decided to reopen for outdoors, all of our policies were with that in mind, which is, a meal out is not worth someone's health. And if we can feel like we are doing the most to ensure their health and safety, that's the only circumstance under which I could reopen and still look my staff in the eye and work alongside them. And so we were, the main thing that they really needed, that we really pushed for, was to ask guests to wear masks when staff were at the table. And I feel like this is an issue that the city has really failed us on, because it's not what they require. But if you look to other cities and other states that have reopened, it is what the state has required, the city has required. And it's a really easy measure. It's not asking a lot. But it goes a long way towards making staff feel like their health is as respected and as important as the health and safety of guests. And I think in July, when we first started doing this, it was met with a lot of resistance. We had a lot of guests who got really angry. We had a guest yell at my staff and say that he was despicable and should be fired because they wouldn't put on their masks, so he wouldn't pour their wine. I mean, it's like truly egregious behavior. And as the months went by, and I think more of the city came back and more restaurants were asking of the same kind of requirements from their guests, we've seen it kind of become much more common. I don't know if it's like self-selecting people who now come to us because they know that we take health and safety very seriously, or if it's just kind of more people are becoming more aware of how to, it's like a new etiquette that you have to learn. It's like becoming more aware of the new outdoor dining etiquette in a time of pandemic, but it's gotten a lot better. But I think to what Camilla was just talking about, like one of the most important things for me is that I just want my staff to feel like they are on a true career path, that it's something that they do that they are proud of, that they can stand behind. And so much of that has to do with respect from guests and also being paid fairly. And I think, we opened King 5 years ago. We had no idea what we were doing. The kind of environment of restaurants right now in the city makes it really unfriendly for individual restaurateurs to open. It makes it really hard for you to pay people properly. It makes it really hard for you to feel like this was meant for small operators and not for kind of like big hospitality chains. So I think, yeah, a lot has to change if we want to keep the vibrant restaurant industry that we love so much in New York.
Kristin, you and I represent, another side of the coin in this equation. We don't run restaurants. We're the diner and then the cheerleader, and we love these places. So when you walk into a restaurant now, do you feel like you have a different responsibility than you used to when you went in? I mean, you used to go in there and your responsibility was to enjoy your meal and to maybe forget about, the rest of the day or something. But I feel now when I go in, it's this kind of civic engagement that wasn't there before. And there's a heightened awareness of everybody else around me. How has this time changed some of your dining habits? And how do you feel when you go into a restaurant?
That's such a great question with so many layers to it, I feel like.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I feel an immense responsibility as a diner and someone who loves and respects what ladies like Cammy and Annie and their teams are doing, because I know, and and hopefully many other people know how much work is going into putting this experience together now more than ever. It's hard. There's a line Camilla wrote a beautiful foreword for the book, and she wrote something about how this industry is not for the faint of heart. And I feel like now more than ever, that is so true. They are risking their health and we don't want to put them at risk. So I feel a responsibility to keep that mask on as much as I can. And to just have some I've always treated with respect and the service with respect, but I think some extra sort of care and thought for your servers and everyone in the restaurant industry right now is really important. Last night I was celebrating my first wedding anniversary with my husband at a lovely restaurant, and it's a fine dining establishment, and they were going to great pains to make sure it was a great experience, but also one that was safe for their staff. And something I noticed was, they were limiting touch points as much as they could. So, maybe that level that you would normally get of sort of warmth and having a waiter stand by you for an extended period of time, they're not doing that right now. And that's important to keep everyone safe. So I think just empathy and respect for the people that are helping you and serving you this incredible meal in particular right now is really important to keep in mind.
I think you could write a sequel to Serving New York called maybe Eating in New York Restaurants, a new guide to manners while eating out in New York City. I think there's something to be said there. And I think people could use the instructions and be
Yeah.
reminded that
We
that
have
is the
we
thing.
have the Roar Diner Top 10. We
There you
actually did a
go.
whole series on, actually based on Annie's, like one of our main paradigms for like how the interaction should be, what the
Yep.
standard really should
Yep.
be. And we've used a lot of that in social, and it was by far the most reposted by chefs and restaurateurs around the city. Like, please listen to us, please help, and sort of be part of the solution rather than another sort of hurdle to making this work.
Annie, are people being more generous with tips?
Yeah, they are. Like we see that, well, we have fewer staff working right now because we wanted to make sure that they were making more than they were before the pandemic hit. But people are definitely being generous. We have some guests who are just, I mean, I mentioned that one bad anecdote, but 99% of guests are so incredibly kind and understanding what's going on. I think that people understand how hard it is, and for the most part, the New York City diner is one of the most like sophisticated diners in the world, and you definitely see that they understand how restaurants run and what they need to do. So yeah, for sure.
I'm
wish
sure-
we could share it with the Back of House, which is another initiative that we're trying to work on, is getting
Yeah.
rid of tips altogether. But yeah.
That's
Wait,
a whole
Annie,
other
will you
whole other
give, can you give
conversation.
just a small Cliff's notes on that? Because I actually am amazed and shocked how much of the public doesn't actually know this.
Yeah, so the tip laws in New York City are so archaic. So the legal definition of being able to receive a tip is that 80% of your time must be spent touching a table or interacting with a guest. So for example, like someone who's a polisher whose job is to polish glasses is not eligible. Someone who technically is a service bartender is technically not eligible. This is the kind of like litigation mess that Cami was referring to earlier, like really like picking at things that are not technically true, because a service bartender obviously has a lot to do with service. They're making the drinks that go out to most of the guests in the dining room. But because of that, it's made it impossible for anyone who's in back of house, like the cooks, like the dishwashers, chefs, to share in tips. And unfortunately, there is this kind of like, you know, you can raise prices, but I think as we've seen with some of the experiments around the city, it hasn't really worked. And I think there's just a psychological perception of like an upfront price sticker shock versus like leaving a tip at the end. But tipping is problematic in other ways. It's obviously, you know, very prone to racism and sexism. And I think in this specific example of the pandemic, a lot more restaurants would feel like they could tell guests how to behave if their staff weren't so afraid that they would be losing their livelihood. But these very specific laws around tips has meant that you get all this money and you just can't equally distribute it. And I think in 2020, our perception of what service means is very different than when these laws were created. Like obviously the cooks have as much to do with service. It's kind of, I think we view it much more holistically now than we used to. And we've always believed in it. That's why we've wanted our kitchen to be open. We work very closely with our back of house team. It really is one team, one dream. And I think that the tips should reflect that. You know, we should be able to share that with back of house. And as it is now, we can't. So yeah, that's definitely something that in an ideal world, we would change about the restaurant industry.
I want to make sure we get to our questions from our audience because there's some really great ones. So the first one that's popping up right now, we're talking about how the restaurant industry can recover from the pandemic. But in a perfect world where we could completely rebuild the restaurant industry from the ground up, where would we start? Interesting blue sky exercise. A good question for a journalist, actually. Kristin, what do you think?
Oh my goodness. I feel like we need a long time to answer that question. I mean, I honestly feel like that's something that Cami and Annie can speak to better, having, you are restaurateurs. I defer to you guys on that one.
Look, I think it's wholesale. A lot of the things that we have been talking about, again, the pandemic has put it all into a glaring light, but I think all of the issues that we talked about, restructuring rent and leverage, with occupancy, restructuring taxes and the financials, when the industry average profitability has come down from 20% 10 years ago to 5% in 2020, 2019, industry average. How are you supposed to provide more for your teams? How can you be creative? How can you have a rainy day fund when every element of your business is being overregulated, overtaxed, over litigated? And again, at what point does this country, I keep saying the pandemic's a grand reckoning. What point does this country say, you know what, this is actually a really important industry. It's one of the last left. I keep calling it the last frontier to a real open door to a middle class. It's one of the only industries left that is a real zero barrier to entry job that has long-term career prospects across the country. There's not many that are left anymore. And we do have to think about what that means to us and what we value it at. And we have to stop being lumped in with small businesses. We need to be a standalone industry that has the respect and the value. And it, I think, top to bottom, operationally, in partnership with all levels of government, needs to be restructured. I mean, it just does. And, I keep saying we're a collection of small businesses, but collectively we are not a small business. 11 million people work in independent restaurants around the country, 15 million if you consider our supply chain. What's that worth?
A lot. Next question. I mean, it's incalculable, right? I mean, if you really do the math, how much is that worth? There's going to be a lot of zeros. It's powerful, and the organizations.
There's not even a restaurant office at the city level.
No. There really should be. So many New Yorkers, especially now in the time of this pandemic, are struggling to put food on the table. What role, if any, can the hospitality industry play in helping feed the hungry population of this city? Annie, what do you think?
I mean, I think we've seen some amazing amazing work done by restaurants. The first thing that comes to mind is the Rethink Kitchen, which has been incredible in partnering with different restaurants and putting food out. I've seen those incredible community refrigerators that have been popping up. I think we deal with so much food every day. There's always leftover, and I know that food banks right now can use more food than ever. So partnering with those organizations, Danielle Hume's kind of been at the head of the Rethink launch, and World Central Kitchen has been doing incredible work. So I think a lot of people are aware that, the first and foremost job of anyone in hospitality is to feed people. And it's not just the people who come into your door, it's anyone who's hungry. So there are incredible restaurants doing work out there.
It's interesting. I think this whole time has redefined what a restaurant means and what a restaurant is. We've seen all these restaurants take on so many roles, from becoming food banks to grocers to lobbying organizations to, snack carts. And I think that now knowing that you can do all that maybe changes the future of the whole business in terms of having different revenue streams, having higher engagement in the community. If we can get into a meaningful recovery period and move back into a growth period, I think the growth is going to be really, really interesting. The next question's for Kristin, right? This is a good question. It's a true thing. We could all use some uplifting, something uplifting or delicious. Do you have a favorite recipe or story that came from the book? Good question with dinner time approaching too.
Oh boy. Well, I do have to say that Annie's team from King submitted a delicious frittata recipe And as Jess had said, it's so simple. A frittata, you know, essentially like is a kitchen sink kind of thing where you can toss in whatever you have in the fridge or in your pantry. But I made it so many times throughout quarantine. And it's just such a beautiful dish because, you know, you can use what you have, and you can serve a number of people with it very easily. It's very cost effective, and you could serve it any time of the day, and it's quite comforting. So I feel like the frittata will be my forever sort of quarantine dish, thanks to Team King. So definitely that. And then I've been continuing to sort of dive into recipes in the book and return to them. And one that I love is the momofuku kimchi stew and pork dish. Super warming and lovely as we kind of hit the colder months. And just overall, what's been really special for me is, you know, hearing people talk about the book and the recipes and saying how much they've missed New York restaurants and their favorite spots like Westbourne and like King, and you know, saying that this sort of brought a little piece of that to them. I know that dining is open now, but some people still don't feel safe, or maybe they can't go due to health reasons, and being able to bring the spirit of these restaurants to the kitchens has been really special.
The next question is for me. So my mom must be in the audience somewhere. Hi, Mom. It says, Howie, why did you start your podcast, and will you continue it? Takeaway Only was a podcast that launched in mid-March, the same week all the restaurants shut down. And the short answer, so I don't take up too much of the time, is that I had to. I've been covering restaurants for the last 20 years, and this is the biggest, most important story in the 20 years of me covering this industry. I've ridden a wave of good fortune in restaurants and food where people have become incredibly interested in what we eat, why we eat it, who makes it. And now's not the time to stop telling the story just because the tide has changed in terms of new restaurants opening and celebrating places. Well, the Odeon is 40 today, actually, so we can still celebrate some anniversaries. But you know, as a journalist, this is the beat I cover, and you just don't abandon your beat. So that's the short of the origin of Takeaway Only. Next question goes back to Kristin. Serving New York, it seems like for the past 10 months has really taught us aspiring home chefs the art of the ingredient substitute. Have you experienced making a meal cooked only with substitutes?
That's a great question. Before I do that, I would just love to say that, Howie, your podcast, we've all talked about ways that people were really creative and really jumped to do something quickly during all of this. And you were one of the first. And when I was looking for information about what was really going on during this, especially early in the pandemic in the restaurant industry, sort of, you know, in the back of these kitchens on the ground, you were providing that information. And I think it was really, really valuable to all of us. So if you have not heard his podcast, you need to subscribe now. I'm a big fan. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to jump to that other question, I certainly did a lot of meal substituting situations during really lockdown period. I was at my in-laws' house in New Jersey. We were sort of working with whatever we could get. I'm sure many of you experienced that, you know, you were just sort of limited to what you could find and get at the store or order online, or if you could get a delivery time or any of these things. And so it was a lot of scrappiness involved in sort of getting creative. And, you know, I'm pretty adept in the kitchen, but lots of Googling substitute options. And something that we were focused on heavily in this book was providing that for people, knowing that, you know, they might be limited to a pantry full of beans. Cami submitted a wonderful bean recipe, and it's honestly so useful and helpful in teaching us how to cook with beans, which I know might sound obvious, but it's not so easy.
Kristin, where can we get the cookbook?
So you can get the cookbook online at servingnewyork.shop. That's our direct website and where you can have the most impact in terms of where your money's going. 100% of the profits are going back to the Roar Fund. Also at our partner stores like The Strand, they now have copies. And in Brooklyn, Books Are Magic, Archistratus, if you're in LA, we have Now Serving stocking it. Lots of great spots across the country.
I want to end with one last question. I'm sure, the people watching this panel today are also concerned about the future of the restaurant business and the people who work there, like we are. And I'm wondering what you guys would say are the things people can do to help support restaurants, whether it's, spending money any way you can, or learning how to advocate for policy and getting involved more politically and civically as you guys all have. What are some steps people can take to make sure things sustain?
I'll leave the political piece to Cami, but in terms of supporting your local restaurants, doing so in whatever way feels safe and comfortable to you, whether that is ordering takeout, and if you're doing that, trying to call the restaurant directly and not using a third-party app is huge. Continuing to dine outdoors. We've had some very lovely guests tell us that come rain or snow or sleet, they're going to come in their parkas and eat outside. So I think that kind of attitude is really heartening and really supportive for us to hear. And if you feel safe to eat indoors and then eating indoors, I think the biggest thing is that every restaurant has a unique set of challenges based on their specific location, real estate, style service. So I think just being open-hearted and empathetic and understanding is honestly the best.
Camilla, from a policy side, how do people join up, get involved? Is it signing petitions? Is it
I think it's really big ways and small. I mean, I think what this panel has showed, and I'm so glad that Kristin highlighted your podcast as well. I mean, the power of every individual to bring awareness, to change the course of policy, to make something important, and to show where your value is, right? You vote with your dollars every day. You choose. I keep saying to people, think about your company. Your company spends money all the time. Where does that go? Who does that support? And from a policy standpoint, this is the time to be hammering the phones. The Restaurants Act is still being held up by the Senate. If every senator got hammered with calls every day, you better believe it would pass. It just has to. So this is the time to not be shy and to not say, you know what, that's annoying. Everyone has 5 minutes to call a senator and a representative. We turned all the New York senators to sponsor the bill. They said no multiple months in a row, and we just kept calling. So, what I think from a policy standpoint, internalize this, make it your own. This isn't about an industry that you are disconnected from. This is about an industry that makes your communities what they are. We take care of you day in and day out. We have never asked to be taken care of. And for better or worse, we're in that position now. And it is only when people internalize it, make it personal, and make it part of their life as well, and what they advocate for, who you vote for, who, again, we have a mayor election coming up, governor at some point, and on the larger election, what is important? What do you talk about with your friends? What do you post on social media? Where do you donate? Where do you insist that your company supports and spends their dollars? Every day there's something big and small you can do. And the question is whether the restaurant industry is part of that for you.
I learned a lot during this panel, and it's really an honor to talk to all three of you, Camilla, Annie, Kristin. It's been really amazing for me to follow, all three of you over the last, half a year, to watch all of your meaningful contributions and how you've, grown into these important new roles. So thank you guys all for what you do. Thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate you. If you're interested in getting involved in Robin Hood's work with the forest, www.theforest.org, and follow on social media to donate and learn more. And please consider supporting Roar and the Robin Hood Relief Fund by purchasing a copy of Serving New York. 100% of the profits will go directly to the service workers that live to take care of us. It's our turn now to take care of them. Thank you so much for being Robin Hood. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.